Legends. Every civilization has them. Stories of gods, titans, and warriors who defied the impossible, reshaping history in their wake. Some are mere myths, whispered around flickering campfires or recorded in ancient texts. Others hold fragments of truth, buried beneath the weight of time. For the Zalari, a proud and ancient species that had ruled the stars for over 20 millennia, there was one legend that endured longer than any other. A story so impossible, so utterly beyond belief, that it had been reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. The legend of the humans, beings of flesh and fury, who burned across the cosmos like a wildfire, unstoppable and relentless. They were conquerors, innovators, and destroyers, carving empires from the void with an unyielding will. Unlike the Zalari, who built their power through diplomacy and patient expansion, the humans had forged their destiny through conflict, adapting, surviving, and prevailing against impossible odds. Yet for all their power, they had vanished. No records, no ruins, no graves or relics to prove they had ever existed. Just whispers passed down through generations, told by elders who barely believed them themselves. To the Zalari, they were nothing more than fiction. A fairy tale designed to instill caution in young warriors. A lesson about arrogance, about stretching too far beyond one's reach. Even the strongest can fall, the elders would say. The humans thought they were gods, now they are dust. But then, the day came when the myth returned. The skies above Zalara Prime, the heart of the Zalari Imperium, had remained unchallenged for centuries. Massive orbital rings, adorned with golden banners of the ruling council, stretched across the heavens. Fleets of sleek silver warships patrolled in rigid formations, their presence a quiet reminder of the Empire's unshakable dominance. No species had dared to challenge them in 5,000 years, until now. It began without warning. A tremor in the fabric of space, an anomaly unlike anything the Zalari had ever recorded. A swirling void of nothingness appeared beyond the planets. Second moon, dark as the abyss itself. Every instrument on the orbital stations faltered. Every sensor failed. Then, they emerged, silent, ominous, human. At first, the Zalari fleet commanders did not comprehend what they were seeing. The vessels that drifted from the rift were unlike any they had encountered before. No visible energy signatures, no bright, boastful hulls or extravagant insignias. Instead, they were black as the void itself, absorbing all light, their forms unnatural against the backdrop of the stars. They moved without hesitation, without the chaotic formations of lesser species. Perfect, calculated, unrelenting. Admiral Vaynor stood frozen on the command bridge of the Eternal Vigil, his eyes locked onto the impossible sight. A veteran of countless conflicts, he had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. He had negotiated peace between warring empires, shattered rebellions, and crushed insurrections before they could fester. Yet, as he stared at the silent fleet hanging in the void, a deep, primal fear gripped him. The newcomers bore no markings, no insignia, no broadcasted identification codes. They did not speak. They did not hail. They simply waited. Vaynor's second-in-command, Commander Dral, spoke in a hushed, disbelieving voice. This doesn't make sense. No species has ships like these. But Vaynor knew better. His ancestors had told him the stories, and now he understood what the old warriors had feared. The myths were true, and they were staring at him through the void. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you enjoy unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. He forced himself to move, to act. Open a channel, all frequencies. The communications officer obeyed immediately. The bridge was deathly silent as the hailing signal was sent out. Across the massive planetary defense grid, thousands of Zalari officers stood by, waiting for a response. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Nothing. Vaynor's fingers curled into Y, a tight fist. The Zalari were masters of diplomacy, the undisputed rulers of the Galactic Council. Every species that had ever encountered them either joined them or was broken beneath them. If these newcomers were a lost civilization, they would see reason. they would understand the balance of power and act accordingly. He tried again. Unknown. Vessels. This is Admiral Vaynor of the Zalari Imperium. You have entered sovereign territory without clearance. Identify yourselves immediately, or we will be forced to consider this an act of aggression. Silence. For the first time in centuries, the void refused to answer. Drawl swallowed hard. Sir, they're moving. On the main display, the black ships began a slow, deliberate advance, not rushing, not posturing, just moving forward. Vaynor's throat tightened. He had commanded fleets against warlords and rogue nations, faced down insurrections that threatened the balance of the Imperium. But this was different. The humans, if they truly were what the legends claimed, were not here to negotiate. Then, the silence shattered. Across every frequency, every channel, and every device connected to the Zalari network, a single message was transmitted. A voice, deep and resolute, carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. A voice that had not been heard in the galaxy for over 1,000 years. You are in our way. The command bridge fell into chaos. Officers scrambled to make sense of the transmission, their minds struggling to comprehend the sheer audacity of the statement. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a demand. It was a declaration. A shiver ran down Vaynor's spine. For centuries, the Zalari had believed the humans were gone. Nothing more than remnants of a forgotten past. But they hadn't vanished. They had been waiting. And now, they had returned. Panic rippled through the Zalari command bridge, a thing unseen in generations. Officers scrambled at their stations, desperate to analyze the silent armada that now drifted toward them. Every attempt to scan the fleet returned nothing but static. No energy readings, no heat signatures, nothing that aligned with known technological classifications. It was as if the ships were ghosts, phantoms of the void, that defied every law of physics the Zalari had ever understood. Admiral Vaynor stood frozen, his mind racing. You are in our way. The message echoed in his thoughts like a death knell. No preamble, no posturing, just a simple, undeniable fact. The humans had returned, and they did not care for pleasantries. His second-in-command, Commander Drawl, was already barking orders. Activate the defense grid! I want orbital stations to— Belay that! Vaynor snapped, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Drawl's mouth shut instantly, but his eyes burned with unspoken protest. Not yet! Drawl's mandibles clicked in frustration. Sir, these vessels are advancing directly toward our capital world. If we do nothing, they will breach planetary orbit within minutes. Vaynor's gaze remained locked on the main view screen. The human fleet was still moving with eerie precision. No acceleration bursts, no visible propulsion, just silent, relentless motion. It was unnatural, impossible even. Drawl exhaled sharply. Sir, with all due respect, we don't even know if they're human. They could be someone else, an unknown faction, some lost remnant of— Vaynor shook his head. No, look at them, Drawl. Look. And when Drawl did, his breath hitched. The ships were unlike anything in the galaxy. Most species designed their warships with pride, displaying sigils, banners, and marks of lineage, ornate designs to inspire fear or awe. The humans? Nothing. No insignia, no wasted ornamentation. These ships were built for war and nothing else. Then there was the formation itself. Other fleets would shift, adjust, reposition. Even the most disciplined militaries had imperfections, ships that lagged slightly behind or moved out of sync. But these vessels moved like a single entity, like a pack of predators closing in for the kill. Drawl swallowed hard. What do we do? Vaynor's mind worked faster than it ever had. First, we do not panic. His voice, steady and commanding, cut through the rising fear among the officers. Second, we remember that we are the Zalari Imperium. We have ruled this sector unchallenged for 5,000 years. That does not change today. His words steadied the bridge crew. Generations of supremacy had bred confidence into their bones. The Zalari were not some fledgling empire to be cowed by ghosts. Still, Vaynor couldn't shake the feeling that history was not on their side today. "Send another transmission," he ordered. "No threats, no ultimatums. Just a question." The communications officer nodded quickly, fingers gliding over the console. "Channel open, sir." Vaynor inhaled slowly, then spoke with the weight of an empire behind his words. "This is Admiral Vaynor of the Zalari Imperium. You have entered sovereign space. State your purpose." Seconds passed. The silence was suffocating. Then, a reply came. "Correction." Vaynor's blood ran cold. This was our space first. The Zalari officers paled, exchanging uneasy glances. What did that mean? Before anyone could react, the first human warship broke. Formation. It drifted forward, moving with the same eerie precision as before. And then, it vanished. Gasps filled the bridge. Draal's eyes widened. "What? Where did it go?" Another officer's fingers flew across a console. "No warp signatures, no FTL jump. It just... Boom! The orbital defense station closest to the capital detonated. A brilliant fireball erupted in the void, sending debris scattering like shattered glass. Emergency klaxons blared across the command bridge as the planetary defense grid immediately went into high alert. Vaynor's claws dug into the console. "Report!" a tactical officer stammered. "The station! It's gone! No energy discharge detected before impact! No visible weapon signature!" Draal's voice was hoarse. "Sir, they didn't fire anything." Vaynor felt his throat tighten. Then how? But deep down, he already knew the answer. It was the ship itself. It had vanished from their scans, approached unnoticed, and then crashed itself into the station at impossible speeds. A perfect, precise strike. Not a suicide run. No reckless, desperate attack. A tactical execution. Cold, calculated warfare. And the rest of the human fleet was still advancing. Draal turned to his superior, his face grim. "Admiral, we need to respond. If we do nothing, they will reach the capital." Vaynor exhaled. The humans had issued their statement, made their move. There was only one thing left to do. Prepare the fleet. His voice was iron. "We intercept them now." Every officer snapped into motion. Commands were relayed, ships mobilized, weapons primed. Across the Zalari defense grid, thousands of warships began shifting into formation. The might of an empire, an unchallenged superpower, was about to be tested. But in the pit of his stomach, Vaynor had a terrible feeling. Because legends were built on truth. And if the humans had truly returned, then the Zalari were about to learn why their ancestors feared them. The Zalari fleet moved into formation with mechanical efficiency. Thousands of warships formed a vast defensive line in low orbit over their capital world, their dark metallic hulls reflecting the distant glow of their system's twin suns. Warships ranging from nimble frigates to colossal dreadnoughts drifted into battle-ready positions. Their weapons hummed with raw energy, primed and ready. From the surface of the planet, millions of civilians looked skyward as the alert sirens blared, their war horns echoing across the great cities of Zaloris Prime. For the first time in over 5,000 years, the Zalari people felt fear. But they had reason to believe in their strength. The Imperium's fleet was one of the most advanced in the galaxy, boasting energy shields that could withstand sustained bombardment, fusion lances capable of vaporizing entire warships in seconds, and mass driver cannons that could tear through planetary crusts with ease. Their military doctrine had been refined over millennia, tested against countless enemies. And yet, this was different. The fleet's admiral, Vaynor, stood rigid on the bridge of the Imperium's flagship, the Eternal Dominion. His eyes were locked on the view screen, where the silent human warships continued their slow, relentless approach. There was something unnatural about their movement. No wasted motion, no visible corrections, no signs of drift. It was as if they weren't ships at all, but the limbs of a singular, unfathomable entity. Then came the next transmission. "You misunderstand." The voice was wrong. It wasn't a singular voice, but a layered distortion, as if 1,000 voices spoke in unison, whispering from the abyss. It lacked tone, lacked emotion, and that terrified the Zalari more than anything else. This is not a battle. For the first time in his long career, Vaynor felt his hands tremble. This is a reclamation. The instant the last syllable was uttered, the human fleet disappeared. It happened in the blink of an eye. One moment, they were there, dozens of ominous warships on the view screen, and then nothing. "Sir," an officer cried, his voice barely masking his panic. "We've lost all visual contact. No warp signatures, no cloaking distortions. Just gone." "Impossible," Drawl muttered, shaking his head. "You don't just—" A proximity alert screamed through the bridge, and then, out of the void, they reappeared. Not in front of the Zalari fleet, behind them. Vaynor's eyes widened in horror. They had just been flanked, instantaneously. "Turn the fleet around," Drawl shouted. "Now!" But it was too late. Before the first Zalari ship could reposition, the first human volley struck. Yet there was no blinding discharge of energy, no roaring plasma torpedoes or crackling beam weapons. Instead, reality itself seemed to fold. Zalari. Ships began to shatter, not from explosions, not from fire or brute force, but as if the very fabric of their hulls had been unwoven. Ships that had stood unchallenged for millennia simply ceased to exist. And then came the second wave. Zalari warships opened fire in every direction, filling the void with deadly streams of plasma and railgun rounds, desperately trying to hit something, anything. But the humans. They were no longer there. Not in any way that made sense. They would flicker in and out of existence, their ships appearing and vanishing in split-second intervals, as if they weren't bound by linear time. One moment, a Zalari dreadnought would be firing its main battery. The next, the human ships would be inside its formation, past its defenses, already firing at point-blank range. It was a massacre. Drawl watched in horror as an entire battleship collapsed in on itself, not from a weapon impact, but from something, breaking it from the inside out. He had no words for what he was witnessing. This wasn't war. This wasn't even combat. This was something else, something ancient, something terrible. "Sir." The tactical officer's voice was hollow. "Our fleet is being unmade." And then, across every open frequency in the Zalari Imperium, the final transmission came. A single, chilling phrase. "You forgot us." The Zalari had ruled the stars for thousands of years. They had thought themselves invincible. They had thought the stories of humanity were just legends. But now, as their fleet was torn apart, as the survivors fled toward the surface in a desperate attempt to escape, one undeniable truth settled in Vaynor's mind. The humans were never gone. They had simply been waiting. And now, the skies of Zaloris, prime burned. The once proud fleet of the Zalari Imperium, an armada that had ruled entire sectors unchallenged, was now in ruins. The orbital battlefield had become a graveyard of shattered warships, their remains drifting lifelessly in the void. The shimmering planetary defense grid that had protected Zaloris Prime for over 5,000 years flickered and died, its generators silently unraveling as if they had never been built at all. But the worst was yet to come. On the surface, chaos reigned. Millions of Zalari civilians stared in horror at the sky as flaming wreckage plummeted downward, trailing smoke and debris. The planetary defense batteries, once thought impenetrable, had gone dark. Entire military districts were in disarray. In the capital city of Velthun, Supreme Chancellor Orax stood in the Grand War Chamber, surrounded by his highest-ranking military officials. The vast holographic war table that displayed the status of their defenses was covered in red, entire fleets gone, planetary shields failing, communications collapsing. This cannot be," Orax whispered, his voice trembling. "It is not possible." Admiral Vaynor's transmission was still playing in the chamber, his final moments aboard the Eternal Dominion before all contact was lost. "Sir, our fleet is being unmade," then static, then silence. A suffocating dread filled the room. The humans had done the impossible. The Zalari had expected a war of attrition. They had expected a long, grueling campaign against an enemy who had returned from legend. They had prepared for months, fortifying their strongholds, reinforcing their fleets, None of it had mattered. "What do we do?" one of the generals whispered, his scales pale with fear. We must negotiate." "Negotiate?" another barked. "With whom? They have not responded to hails. They have not sent terms. They have not even declared war. They have simply arrived." A deep, suffocating silence filled the chamber, and then a single alert cut through the silence. A message. One word. "Open!" The Chancellor's blood ran cold. "What does it mean?" one of the strategists asked. A moment later, the Grand War Chamber's security doors slammed shut. The lights flickered, and then every holographic display shifted. Lines of unreadable text scrolling across the surfaces, symbols the Zalari had never seen before. Something was inside their network. No, something had always been inside their network. A rising mechanical whine filled the air. Then the holographic displays fractured, not with static, but with something worse. A shape. At first, it was just a shadow, a flickering, impossible shape that shifted and twisted in ways the mind could barely comprehend. And then it took form. A figure. It was humanoid, but wrong. A towering silhouette clad in something that wasn't armor, but wasn't flesh either. Its face was featureless, a void where its eyes should have been. And when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of 1,000 whispers layered atop one another. "You built your empire atop the ruins of ours." Orax stumbled backward, his breath coming in ragged gasps. This is not real. This is a trick." The figure tilted its head. "You speak of war. You speak of conquest, but you do not remember the reckoning." At that moment, across the entire planet, the skies split open. The human fleet was here. Not just the warships that had annihilated the Zalari fleet, but something else, something older. From the void emerged massive structures, dark, angular, obelisks the size of cities, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly glow. They descended slowly, deliberately, casting vast shadows over the cities below. Then came the second message. "We are not invaders. We are not conquerors. We are the architects of this world, and we have returned." A high-pitched, incomprehensible signal pulsed through every Zalari communication channel. The Planetary Defense Command scrambled to respond, attempting to regain control of their failing systems, but the truth became undeniable. Their weapons would not fire. Their warships would not move. Their networks were no longer theirs, Orax's. Breath came in shallow gasps. His mind screamed for a solution. Some way to salvage the situation. Some path to survival. And then, the first city vanished. Not in an explosion. Not in fire, but in erasure. One moment, the sprawling metropolis of Vaelthun Secundus was there, home to 12 million citizens. The next, it was simply gone. A perfectly carved void, as if it had never existed at all. The war chamber erupted. "In chaos, they are eradicating us!" one of the generals screamed. "We have to—" The lights flickered again, and the shadowed figure stepped forward. For the first time, Orax saw what lay beneath the surface. A human face. Not a living one. Not a corpse. Something in between. And then, softly, with the weight of an entire species behind it, the figure spoke once more. "You were not meant to survive." Orax fell to his knees. This was not a war. It had never been a war. This was a reclamation. Humanity had returned, and the Zalari Imperium had no place in their galaxy anymore. Across Zaloris Prime, reality itself seemed to unravel. The cities that once stood as monuments to Zalari supremacy were now fading. Not in flames, not in ruin, but in absence. No destruction, no debris, no radiation. Just gone. As if those towering structures, the homes, the factories, the streets, had never been there to begin with. The terrifying precision of the erasure sent shockwaves through the remaining Zalari leadership. The Supreme Chancellor Orax had long since collapsed into his seat in the Grand War Chamber, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He had spent his entire life believing in the eternal reign of the Zalari Imperium. That belief was now dissolving in front of his very eyes. Outside, across the entire planet, billions of Zalari citizens screamed in terror as they witnessed the impossible. Their fleets were gone, their defenses were silent, and their leaders were just as powerless as they were, and above them, the human fleet remained motionless. Their ships, colossal black monoliths of unknown construction, hovered in absolute silence. The laws of physics themselves seemed to bend around their forms. No visible engines, no thrusters, no heat signatures, they simply existed. Then, without warning, an entire sector of the capital went dark. One moment, it was alive with frantic movement, millions of Zalari desperately seeking shelter, attempting to flee. The next, it was an empty void, wiped from existence. The planet's crust wasn't even disturbed. It was surgical, precise, unfathomable. Something more terrifying than annihilation had arrived. Something that could erase a civilization as if it had never existed at all. The Grand War chamber descended into chaos. The highest-ranking Zalari officers, once the most powerful individuals in the Imperium, were now shouting over one another, demanding answers, searching for any explanation that could make this nightmare make sense. One of the intelligence officers, a hardened veteran of countless wars, stared at the war table in disbelief. "We need to fight back," he shouted. "We still have ground forces." "Their weapons will not fire," another officer cut in, his voice trembling. "Every automated defense system is unresponsive." "We still have planetary artillery," another general insisted. We have nothing." The voice that silenced the room belonged to Admiral Siros, the last surviving fleet commander. His normally sharp, commanding tone was flat, hollow. His eyes remained fixed on the war table, where the reports were still coming in. He turned to the Chancellor, his throat dry. "Sir, we are not at war." Orax blinked, his reptilian pupils constricting. "Not at war? What do you—" "This is not war," Siros repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is not conquest. This is—" He hesitated. The words caught in his throat, but he forced himself to say them anyway. "This is judgment." The war chamber fell deathly silent. And then the humans spoke, not through transmissions, not through screens or auditory signals. Their voices appeared inside every Zalari mind at once. It was not a single voice, nor was it many. It was infinite. A whisper that carried the weight of millennia. "You will understand what you have done." Suddenly, the entire planet shifted. Orax gasped as he felt something impossible happening to reality itself. It was as if time had shattered. The cityscape outside the war chamber flickered, like a flame, caught in the wind. One moment, it was Zaloris Prime, a metropolis of towering spires, glowing skyways, and technological marvels that had stood for over 5,000 years. The next, it was something else. Something ancient, something forbidden. The Zalari homeworld was no longer their own. Through the windows, they could see it. The shifting forms of cities that predated their own civilization. Structures that should not exist. Monuments built in a time so distant that no Zalari historian had ever recorded their presence. "By the stars," one of the generals whispered, his scales paling. Orax stepped forward, his body trembling. The truth was unraveling before them. Zaloris Prime had not always belonged to the Zalari. The Imperium's history books spoke of the first dawn, the era when their ancestors had risen from the sands and built their first great empire. They had always believed themselves to be the first true masters of this world. But now, they saw the past for what it really was. Their empire was built atop ruins, and those ruins belonged to the humans. A forgotten legacy. The shimmering forms of long-dead cities flickered across the landscape. Vast monolithic towers of blackened steel and glowing obsidian. The air itself seemed to tremble with whispers, as if the ghosts of a lost civilization were reaching out from across time. Then came the final revelation. A single structure. A temple, a monument, a tomb. Began to rise from beneath the surface, and, At its center stood a sigil that no Zalari had ever seen before. Yet somehow they all understood. The mark of humanity. They had returned to reclaim what was theirs. Orax fell to his knees, his mind breaking under the weight of the truth. "We are not the conquerors," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We were never the rulers of this world." A shadow passed over the city. The largest human vessel yet descended from orbit. A behemoth of impossible proportions, its form shifting with unnatural precision, like a construct of light and darkness, fused together. It did not land. It did not need to. Instead, it sent one final message, one final truth. Uzaks were never meant to inherit this world. And with those words, the fate of the Zalari was sealed. Their empire, their history, would become legend. Just as the humans had once been. The truth had shattered them. The Zalari, once the undisputed rulers of the outer spiral arm, were now nothing more than trespassers in their own world. The realization swept through their ranks like a wildfire, unraveling the very foundations of their beliefs. Their empire, their history, their supremacy, all of it had been a lie. The chamber was deathly silent. Not a single Zalari dared to speak. Above them, the human fleet remained unmoving, their presence a silent reminder of the cosmic balance that had been upended. They had not come as invaders. No, the humans had come for something far worse. They had come to rewrite history, and it had already begun. The erasure of an empire across the Zalari Imperium. Reports flooded in. Broadcasts from desperate planetary governors, broken transmissions from commanders who had lost control of their fleets, terrified cries from civilians who no longer understood the world around them. Zalari colonies, once thriving metropolises, were disappearing. Not in fire, not in war, but in silence. One moment they existed, teeming with life, illuminated by the glow of countless skyscrapers, humming with the ceaseless activity of civilization. The next, only emptiness remained. The Zalari homeworld was not the only one being rewritten. Entire sectors blinked out of existence. And the worst part? No one remembered them. For those still alive, there was no evidence that those planets had ever existed. No maps showed their presence. No records contained their names. No memories of them remained. It was as if those entire worlds, millennia of history, culture, and life, had simply never been. In the Grand War Chamber, Orax and his generals watched, in horror as their holographic star charts changed in real time, the empire they had once ruled over. A vast dominion that stretched across hundreds of systems was shrinking before their eyes. The Chancellor's scaled hands trembled as he reached out, as if trying to grasp the disappearing stars. "This is impossible," he whispered. Admiral Cyros clenched his jaw, his mind racing. This is not war. This is something beyond war, beyond annihilation. He turned to the intelligence officer, his voice sharp. "What about the archives? Do we still have records of those systems?" The officer, once a brilliant strategist, now a broken shell, stared blankly at the screen. We did. But now," he gestured to the data stream, where the records had once been displayed. Nothing. It was not that they had been deleted. They had never been written at all. The humans were not erasing the Zalari Empire. They were unmaking it. The final transmission. A new transmission appeared on the central war table, not from the Zalari, not from their allies, but from the humans. For the first time, the galaxy heard their voice. It was not a voice of flesh and bone. It was ancient. It was many voices, speaking as one, and it spoke without words. The message was not sent through conventional channels. It bypassed communication relays, firewalls, encryption. Every form of technology the Zalari possessed. It was projected directly into the minds of every living being in the Imperium. "You do not remember us, but we remember you." Orax gritted his teeth as his vision blurred, his mind struggling to process the overwhelming presence pressing against his consciousness. The humans were not merely speaking. They were showing. A flood of memories, ancient, buried memories, rushed into the minds of every Zalari. Memories that did not belong to them. Memories of a world before the Imperium. Memories of an empire that had ruled these stars long before the Zalari were born. Memories of humanity. A forgotten legacy reclaimed. The vision was overwhelming. In an instant, the Zalari saw a past they had never known, a past that had been buried. Their homeworld, Zaloris Prime, had once been known by another name, a name so ancient, so deeply erased, that it had never been spoken in Zalari history. But now, they heard it, a whisper through time. Earth. It was not a Zalari world. It never had been. It had belonged to the first great civilization, and it had been taken from them. The Zalari Imperium, the great conquerors of the Spiral Arm, had not built their empire. They had inherited it from the ashes of humanity. The realization shattered Orax's mind. The Zalari had not been the first to reach the stars. They had not been the first to rule. They had simply walked through the ruins of something greater. And now, the true rulers had returned. The arrival of the ark above Zaloris Prime, the human fleet finally moved. The colossal monoliths of their warships parted as something far greater emerged from the rift in space. The ark, the last ship of the First Empire. It was impossibly vast, a construct that dwarfed planets, its surface marked with symbols that no living species could comprehend. It had drifted through the void for tens of thousands of years, waiting, watching, and now, it had come home. The final message echoed in the minds of every Zalari. You took what was not yours. You claimed a history that was never meant for you. Now, we reclaim what is ours. The sky darkened, the ground trembled, and as the final remnants of the Zalari Imperium began to fade from existence, the truth became clear. The humans had not returned as conquerors, they had returned as gods. The sky itself seemed to fracture. From the depths of space, the ark loomed over Zaloris Prime, a structure so vast that even the Zalari homeworld seemed insignificant beneath its shadow. The construct did not move like a ship, nor did it operate like any known technology. It simply was. It had always been, and now it was awake. Across the planet, the Zalari trembled as an unfathomable force swept through their world. Not a weapon, not an invasion, but something deeper. Reality itself was changing. A history rewritten on every screen, every data terminal, every etched inscription in Zalari history. Something impossible was happening. Records were rewriting themselves. The names of their greatest emperors, their victories, their lineage, all of it was shifting, unraveling, erasing. For the first time in Zalari history, they felt fear. Across the planet, scholars and scientists desperately tried to save their archives, but it was already too late. Entire libraries vanished. Historical records, physical and digital, became blank slates. Monuments that had stood for thousands of years now bore no inscriptions. The names of their ancestors were wiped from memory. It was not just a loss of data. It was a loss of identity. The Zalari Imperium was not being destroyed in battle. It was being erased from history itself. Their people, the once mighty rulers of the Spiral Arm, were being reduced to ghosts, footnotes in a history they had stolen. The whispers of the past echoed in their minds. You were never meant to rule. You were never the first. You have always been the invaders. The collapse of the Zalari Imperium from the edges of the Empire, Zalari warfleets desperately fled. But it was useless. Planets that had once held billions were vanishing, not in fire, but in silence. Whole civilizations disappeared, as if they had never existed. Zalari officers on distant colonies sent frantic distress calls, only to find no one left to answer. Some ships tried to escape through the wormhole gateways, but when they arrived, they found only darkness. The ancient rifts, once stable corridors that connected the Empire, were collapsing. One by one, the cosmic bridges that held the Imperium together shattered, leaving them stranded. Those who remained in the core worlds watched helplessly as their fleets vanished from their tactical displays, their homeworlds falling into oblivion. For the first time in recorded history, the Zalari had no future. The return of the Lost Kings at the heart of the Imperium, inside the Grand War Chamber. Chancellor Orax stared in horror at the shattered remains of his empire. The holographic star map, once filled with the proud expanse of Zalari-controlled space, was now a broken ruin. Out of 300 worlds, only one remained. Zaloris Prime. The silence was unbearable. Admiral Cyros collapsed to his knees, his scaled hands clawing at his own face. "This isn't real. This can't be real," he whispered. Orax clenched his teeth, his voice shaking. "Why?" he demanded, his words barely a whisper. And then, the voice returned, but this time, it was not a message. It was a presence. For the first time in eons, the humans stepped forward. Not as myths, not as stories, but as legends reborn. They did not arrive in flesh and blood. They did not need to. These very air crackled as they appeared, not physical beings, but something greater. The chamber darkened, the light bending as their forms took shape, shifting silhouettes of energy, echoing with voices that carried the weight of forgotten millennia. The Zalari fell to their knees, not because they wanted to, because they had to. The final judgment. Orax tried to speak, but his voice was swallowed by the silence. He felt something pressing into his mind, not an attack, but a memory. A memory so old that it predated his own species. A world, blue and vibrant, circling a yellow sun, cities of glass and steel, stretching into the heavens. A people who had once ruled the stars, not with conquest, but with knowledge, with unity, with strength. A people who had vanished, a people who had been erased. The truth seared through him. The Zalari had not built their empire. They had scavenged it. They had risen upon the ruins of humanity, and the humans had let them, until now. The presence spoke, and this time, it was not a whisper. "You built your empire atop our bones. You claimed our worlds as your own. You erased our history and made yourselves gods. But you were never the rulers of these stars." The ark rumbled, its colossal structure pulsing with energy. Orax clutched his chest as his body burned with knowledge. Memories that were not his. Memories of a time before the Zalari, of battles fought in the void, of an empire that had stood against the darkness itself. Humanity had not fallen to war. Humanity had not vanished in weakness. They had left. And now, they had returned. The end of an age, the final judgment was not spoken. It did not need to be. Across the surface of Zaloris Prime, the Zalari screamed as the very fabric of their civilization began to unravel. Their towers, their cities, their history, all of it was being rewritten. Orax gasped as he saw his own reflection flicker, distort, change, his name, his lineage, his empire. All of it was fading. The last thing he heard was the whisper of a civilization far older than his own. "You were never the first. You were never meant to rule." Now, the true heirs return. And then, silence. The Zalari were gone. The last echoes of their empire vanished into nothingness. Above the world that had once been Zaloris Prime, the ark drifted onward. The true rulers of the stars had reclaimed their throne, and the galaxy would never forget them. Again, humanity was never lost. We were only waiting. The age of the Lost Kings had begun. Final call to action: every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Right now, HFY Chronicles-849 is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you love unraveling the mysteries of the universe, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us grow this community together. What do you think? What would happen if humanity truly returned like this? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this story, leave a like to let us know you want more. Thank you for watching, and remember,